Well, it appears that the Hermit Kingdom of North Korea is still testing nukes. Despite firing an abundance of missiles into the Sea of Japan, President Kim is still not happy. He wants the nuclear deterrent to be much stronger than it is at present. We also learned a while ago that North Korean troops have been sent to the front lines of the war in Ukraine to help out the Russians and cement North Korea's friendship with Vladimir Putin. But this presents a slight dilemma for the Kim regime. Their power is dependent on North Korea's isolation and repression, but the 7,000 troops sent to Eastern Europe have enjoyed internet access for the first time in their life. The rumour mill suggests they are feasting on pornography, but perhaps they are learning enough about the outside world to realise just how deprived they are at home. That's why Mr. Kim will never give up his nuclear programme. Saddam Hussein and Colonel Gaddafi did that, and look what happened to them. Just like his predecessors, Mr. Kim is determined not to allow an international force, led by the USA, to storm in and dethrone his premiership. The Korean War, which started in 1950, has not actually ended. There was a ceasefire in 1953, but not a treaty. Since that time there have been skirmishes at the border, but nothing resembling a recommencement of warfare. Not that North Korea has been a particularly good neighbour. Some examples of their diabolical behaviour include numerous attempts to assassinate South Korean leaders, hijacking international flights, kidnapping foreigners, and more recently, cyber hacking. Naturally, this malfeasance has led to harsh economic sanctions from all over the world, hence the perennially struggling economy. Despite their imposed culture of juche, meaning aggressive self-reliance, North Korea has always relied on money and arms from their allies, particularly the Soviet Union. Once that powerful nation collapsed, North Korea hit troubled times and began to get nervous about security. They decided that they needed their own nuclear arsenal, although there was a brief period where they sat down with the West for negotiations. Under US President Bill Clinton's administration, a peace deal was actually reached, but when his Republican rivals gained control of the Congress at the mid-term elections, they did everything they could to ensure it failed. Later, when George W. Bush delivered his Axis of Evil speech, North Korea became hostile. This meant that Pyongyang wouldn't cooperate with any international non-proliferation treaties and continued developing its own nukes, with the first successfully tested in 2006. Today, they are a genuine nuclear power with missiles that can reach almost any country on Earth. From ancient times up until the beginning of the 20th century, the Korean peninsula was always run by an assortment of royal dynasties. It was later colonized by the Japanese Empire in 1910. They stayed on for decades and brutalized their Korean subjects until the end of World War II. It was during this occupation that Kim Il-sung was born, in April 1912, allegedly. From the beginning, he was taught by his father to hate the Japanese overlords and never give in to them. Kim got involved in resistance movements at a young age, and his family would end up getting arrested and exiled to the Chinese region of Manchuria, also a Japanese colony. It was here that he joined the Chinese Communist Party in 1931 and continued the fight against Japanese imperialism. Over time, he would make powerful friends in both China and Russia, and he even served in the Soviet army as a major during World War II. This allowed him to return to his homeland in 1945, when the last Japanese forces in Korea were destroyed by the Red Army. After the war, the peninsula was carved up and occupied by the victorious Allies. Korea would be split across the 38th parallel. The USSR took the north and the USA took the south. There were numerous attempts to reunify the Koreas, but the two sides couldn't agree on what type of government they wanted to establish. The Soviets created a committee to run things in the north, and Kim Il-sung, now chairman of the Korean Communist Party, was put in charge and given the title of Premier. Whilst in the south, the people elected their own leader Syngman Rhee, and most of the American forces went home. Kim Il-sung quickly established his dictatorship and developed a planned, centralized economy, together with the proud philosophy of juche, total self-reliance. However, his ultimate goal was to unite all of Korea under his own socialist dictatorship. In typical communist fashion, Premier Kim released all sorts of nonsense propaganda about South Korea planning an invasion, thereby justifying a preemptive strike by the North. With Stalin's blessing in 1950, he did exactly that, and on June 25th, the Korean War began. The Northern forces swiftly took over almost all of the South, until the United Nations forces, led by the USA, came to the rescue a few weeks later. Landing in Incheon, the UN forces quickly liberated the South and pushed the Northern forces all the way back to the Chinese border. With victory in sight for the UN troops, China became uncomfortable with the US and her allies on their doorstep, so they entered the war and pushed the Allied forces back to the 38th parallel. In 1953, an armistice was signed and a new border was established, in virtually the same place as the previous one. The area around this new border became the infamous DMZ, the Demilitarized Zone. Located by the DMZ, we had the South Korean Army, with its American-made nukes, sitting on one side, and the North Korean Army, with its Soviet-made nukes, sitting on the other. These weapons of mass destruction would spend the next 6 decades pointing at each Korea from across the fence. Kim Il-sung consolidated his power in North Korea, which became surprisingly prosperous throughout the 1960s and 70s, even outdoing their capitalist rivals in the South for a short while. In 1972, a new constitution was written, giving Kim Il-sung the new title of president, along with many other unsettling new powers. He brutally suppressed opponents, real and imagined, promoted his cult of personality, and began rewriting official history, even claiming that he, almost single-handedly, defeated the Japanese in 1945, thus liberating the Korean peninsula. Anyone who disagreed with his agenda ended up in the prison camps. School children were taught that he alone feeds and clothes the nation, and his birthplace in Mangyongdae-guyok became a place of pilgrimage. The Korean War also meant that South Korea and the USA joined Japan in forming an unholy trinity of North Korean enemies. He later anointed his son Kim Jong-il as his successor, confirming North Korea's status as a monarchy in all but name. Economic stagnation in the 1980s, followed by a massive famine and the collapse of the Soviet Union, all conspired to hammer North Korea into the shattered society that it is today. In 1994, Kim Il-sung died. In 1998, the constitution was amended once again to make Kim Il-sung the eternal president of North Korea. The new supreme ruler, Kim Jong-il, had over 50 different job titles, yet officially, his dad was still the president. He carried on the laughable mythology about the Kim family, like the story about his own birth at the beautiful Mount Paektu, where a dove flew through the sky to herald his arrival. Then winter turned to spring, a double rainbow suddenly appeared, and a bright star shone in the sky. He took the title of Dear Leader, and following the famine, took credit for the food aid that was given by the international community for the starving North Koreans. Now that he, the most obnoxious member of the Kim dynasty, is gone, deceased in 2011, the new Dear Leader has actually started reaching out. Kim Jong-un has thus far met with the presidents of South Korea, China, Russia, and even the USA. It appears that his regime's plan is to present a more palatable North Korean leadership, thus beginning possible trade talks, but without actually giving up the nukes. So how do they plan to achieve this marketing miracle? Apparently, through the traditional good cop, bad cop routine. Kim Jong-un plays the respectable statesman, whilst his sister, and allegedly second in command, plays the henchman. The enticing Kim Yo-jong has been seen hovering in the background for her brother's entire leadership, but has recently stepped into the spotlight. She has been placed in charge of relations with the USA and South Korea, and is her brother's closest advisor. In 2018, relations between the Koreas were looking okay. Kim Jong-un had met with South Korean President Moon Jae-in several times. There was talk of peace, dropping sanctions, a new inter-Korean liaison office was built. They even played together as a united Korean team at the 2018 Winter Olympics. But it didn't last. The practice of South Korea sending information leaflets and food across the border via balloon was frustrating the North Korean regime. In addition, they wanted South Korea to break away from their alliances with the USA, Japan, etc., and do deals with North Korea exclusively. Unfortunately, that is something the South Korean president cannot offer. The fallout saw the resumption of North Korean military activities in the DMZ, and the impressive new liaison building was turned to rubble. All news reports suggest that these provocative moves were ordered by Kim Yo-jong. This gives Kim Jong-un plausible deniability should negotiations ever resume. So, was the graciousness show by the Kims in 2018 just theatre? Or is there a genuine desire for peace on the Korean peninsula? For decades, the West has assumed that the Kim regime will fall at any minute, and yet they just keep on keeping on. Now that they have a significant nuclear capability, an invasion by the US and her allies is highly unlikely. Then there is China. Whilst the Chinese government is getting tired of North Korea, they are happy to have that geographical buffer between themselves and the American artillery in South Korea. A united Korean democracy may see those weapons move up north, right next to the Chinese border. They really don't want that, nor do they want thousands of hungry North Korean refugees pouring over the border into their already overpopulated country. Therefore, Beijing reluctantly continues to be a large source of economic aid for the North Korean government. The next few years have the potential to change North Korea significantly. Although we have heard this all before,